Welcome to the Journey of Self-Growth podcast, episode 15. I'm Kite, the host of this event, which was created so myself and others can share perspective on the concept of it in hopes that one another's insights would be relatable, establishes awareness, and inspires listeners to adopt and maintain such behavior. The definition of self-growth is a process of developing new skills, attitudes, actions, or reactions that can have a beneficial impact on your life and increases your overall well-being. Tonight's featured guest is Lewis. Hello, Eula. How are you?
I'm good. How are you tonight?
I'm doing well. I appreciate you asking. What can you tell me about yourself?
Well, I am a retired former medical person. I am currently enrolled at the Berkeley School of Theology, pursuing a master's in community leadership. I am the overseer of our women's ministry at my church, as well as I oversee the women's auxiliary for our district. But I am also the ninth child of 10, originally from Louisiana, moved to California with my family. And I am the mother of three daughters. And I live in the city of Vallejo and just loving being retired.
I'm glad to hear that. And congratulations on the retirement. I think it is an achievement.
Most definitely. I actually retired twice. I retired once in June of 2020, right in the midst of the pandemic. And then they brought me back for 6 months to train the young woman that was hired into my position. So I retired again in January of 2021. So I'm twice retired.
Wow, that's kind of you. And I would say thank God for self-growth because without that, you may not been able to been retiring two times.
Right, 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 right. Yeah, and I think I shared with you previously that when I retired, I went through an identity crisis, and I don't know if all people when they retire they go through this, but I've talked to several people that kind of have had the same similar perspectives in that you've done a job for a number of years. So I
Mm,
worked for 25 years as a respiratory therapist. So when you ask the question, tell me about yourself, that was usually my response, is that I would tell people what I did
mhm.
as opposed to who I am. And I think for some reason we tend to do that when people ask us, well, tell me about yourself. We talk in terms of what we do and not so much of who we are.
Wow, that's interesting. I think I can relate to that also. And my next question is, what would be your perspective on the concept of self-growth?
Well, I was glad that you read the definition because I also looked it up, and one of the things that I find that I think is indicative of me as far as self growth is concerned is that one of my professors calls me a researcher, because even when they give me assignments, I always have to look it up to get more information before I can comment on it. And so when it comes to self growth, I think to a sermon that I listened to one time, and the preacher said it's about progression and not perfection. So
Mm,
self growth is always moving, to me, always moving forward. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you're moving forward as far as school is concerned, but moving forward in some area of your life to improve and mature and to progress, so that you're not the same today as you were 20 years ago.
mm.
I think I heard a quote by Muhammad Ali. In fact, I posted it on my Facebook page, and Muhammad Ali said, and I'm going to paraphrase, but he said, if you're thinking the same way at 50 as you were when you were 20, then you've wasted 30 years.
Wow. Okay. I I'm going to inquire about this statement sooner than later. But before I do, I want to ask you another question.
Okay.
How are you currently growing?
Um, So I think currently I'm growing in several ways. First and foremost, when I retired, as I said, I went through this, I had this identity crisis. And in that situation, I also had to ask myself or to figure out, okay, what are you going to do now? Because I'm no longer getting up, going to a job every day and working. What are you going to do now? And then also realizing that I had more years, and you probably heard some older people say this, more years behind me than ahead of me. So my thought turned to what can I give back to the community to make it a better place?
Mm,
And that was when I decided to enroll over at the Berkeley School of Theology and pursuing this degree in community leadership. And so right now I am doing an internship with an organization here in Vallejo called Vallejo Together. And Vallejo Together provides services and resources for the unhoused here in the city of Vallejo. And so I serve as their Interfaith Coalition coordinator. So I work with faith-based organizations to provide services and resources to the unhoused individuals here in Vallejo. And in moving into this position for my internship, it also required me to learn more about people who are unhoused,
hmm
because there are a lot of myths out there about people who are homeless.
mm,
Immediately people think that they're on drugs, they don't want to, they're lazy, they don't want to live in a house, they're mentally ill, but that's not the case. So I
hmm
had to educate myself. So I've done a lot of reading and research so that I can have a better understanding of what it means to be unhoused and how people will end up um, becoming unhoused. There
mm,
was a study that was done through UC San Francisco that showed that the number one cause of people becoming unhoused is loss of income.
mm,
And we know that in the state of California, there are housing is very expensive, and a lot of companies are moving out of California. So a lot of people are getting laid off and losing their jobs.
mm,
So being unhoused can happen to any of us.
hmm
And so when you talk about self growth, that's one of the areas that I have pursued self growth in, as far as community work, as well as trying to learn more about the unhoused community, but also how to be an advocate
mm,
for the unhoused. And so that's one area. The other area is I mentioned when you asked for my bio, I mentioned to you that my faith was very important to me.
hmm
And so I'm a Sunday school teacher. I sometimes teach Bible study for pastor. And so that requires also a lot of reading, a lot of research, a lot of understanding, a lot of praying, a lot of meditation in order to be able to rightfully divide the word of God. And then lastly, and it was interesting because when you sent me the nine intelligent, I have my notes here, but the nine areas of intelligence,
hmm
one of them talked about nature. And so I watch a lot of National Geographic.
mm,
I watch a lot of National Geographic Wild. I watch a lot of shows dealing with indigenous people in Alaska and
mm,
how they're talking about climate change
hmm
and how it's affecting them. And so I think for us, I don't know if we truly understand the full extent of climate change, but this kind of helps me to become aware of it.
mm,
And so I tend to be a better steward over um, the earth. Since I've retired, I really recycle now. It's not just kind of hit or miss, but I really recycle. I love planting and putting, I have a container plants on my balcony. And so that's another area as far as self growth is concerned. And then it mentioned, just kind of being aware of kind of your weaknesses and where you need to grow. And so I think that is another area of self growth. I don't know if I answered your question. You can tell me if I didn't, or if I just kind of rambled on. You can let me know.
I relate to what you're saying. I think you did answer your my question in a variety of different references of initiatives that you've done. So I do admire your efforts, firstly, is what I wanted to say. Secondly, um regarding the experience that you had with the homeless or the transient people in Vallejo, you had mentioned that you learned more about the culture of the homeless, and it seems from my perspective, when one puts forth an effort to learn, the outcome of that effort is an enhanced perspective on the focus content that they've discovered or chose to learn about. Would you agree that with learning comes an enhanced perspective?
Learning comes in enhanced perspective. Can you kind of elaborate on that a little bit more?
Well, I want to repeat the statement. The result of learning can be an enhanced perspective in general.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think and since we're specifically talking about, my journey in learning, trying to learn more about the social and health issues of being unhoused, I can relate to, I can tell you about an incident that took place as recently as last week.
Mm,
I don't carry a lot of cash. I
mm,
really don't. And so I was meeting a friend for lunch in Walnut Creek, and I walked past a young lady that said, can you spare some change?
mm,
And I said, I don't have any cash. And I was getting ready to walk into the restaurant, and this is going to sound churchy, but the Holy Spirit convicted me because it said, you're getting ready to walk in here and you're probably going to pay $75 for lunch, because this wasn't a cheap restaurant. You're probably going to spend $75 on lunch, and you just walked past this lady that wants something to eat. So I
mm,
made a beeline, turned around, went back to her, and walked her down. I said, "What do you want to eat? Where do you?" And I wasn't familiar with the area, and she said, "There's a Shake Shack right down the street." So I walked with her down to Shake Shack, had a conversation with her. Her name was Brandy. We talked about the weather, and we had a little conversation. And I bought her lunch. And as I'm buying her lunch, she was timid. It was like, okay, what do you want to drink? Can I have a milkshake? And then I pulled up the milkshake menu. Well, can I try that one? Of course, whatever you want. Tell me what you want, and that's what I'm going to buy for you. And
mm,
so I say that I relate that experience to say that in all of the learning that I have done, to know more about the unhoused, it has caused me to be more empathetic
mm.
towards their situation and to have more compassion.
Okay. I appreciate you sharing that testimony and that story regarding someone who was homeless. I experienced something similar actually today. But at the time, I was out front of my job, and a man asked me for some money, and I think he also said that he wanted some food, but I told him that I didn't have it, and I was being honest. I didn't have any cash on me at the time. Um, And so I can relate you to a degree. And but in fairness to yourself, I think what I want to ask is initially when you told her no, what was the intent of you telling her no the first time?
I really didn't have any cash. I don't carry cash.
Yeah.
I carry a debit card. So I rarely have any cash money in my pocket. If I would have had any cash in my purse, I would have given it to her. But
Mm.
I had no cash. And so that was my reasoning, was strictly I didn't have anything. And I have to be perfectly honest. There's sometimes when I feel like sometimes I'm led to go above and beyond.
Mm.
Sometimes it's just handing somebody a couple of dollars. Sometimes it's doing something like what I did with her. So it's varying degrees. It's not always that I buy a whole meal. Sometimes I'll go in and I might buy a sandwich or something and give it to them when I come back out. And sometimes it's more about, my emphasis is more on the food than on the money.
Hmm.
So I'll ask, are you hungry? Because if you're hungry, I'm going to meet your need and try to make sure that you have something to eat.
Yes. There's been times when there's been times when I think I fell into the temptation of doubting an expression to me when in terms of someone asking for money or um yeah, particularly when they ask for money. So the statement usually will be, can I have some money so I can go buy some food? And me overlooking what was being stated in the present caused me to decide to not give them money because I had already conjured in my mind that they're going to probably go use this money to go buy drugs. But I think what I learned from that is I probably should just simply um, go with what the person is saying. And if they choose to go buy drugs, outside of my view, I mean, that's out of my control. But if I'm if I don't know what a person is true intentions are,
Mhm.
even if someone tells you what they intend to do, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to do it. But if they say it and I can relate to what you're saying, like you want some food and you need some money and I have it, I think going forward, I'm just gonna simply give them the money and hope for the best because I think I'm doing myself a disservice by doubting what someone is saying. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and I think as far as giving is concerned, when we give, we've done our part. What they
Hmm.
do with it, that's between them and their God.
Hmm.
But if I have it and you need it and I give it to you, then I have to learn how to not try to control how you use it. I had
Hmm.
to learn that lesson with my daughter, because I would give her money and then I would try to tell her what to do with the money.
Hmm.
But then you're not giving out of just generosity and a pure heart. Now you're trying to control.
Hmm.
So I would agree that if once you give it to them, whatever they do with it after that, then that's on them.
Hmm.
But my heart is clear because I've done what the Spirit has told me to do.
Hmm.
And in all honesty, there's times when there, and I'm just going to be transparent. There's times when I don't feel like I'm being led to give anything.
Hmm.
There are times when that happens. And then there's times when I'm led to do more than what the average person would do.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, there's been times when I've given someone $20 because that's what the Spirit led me to do.
Hmm.
So I try to be in tune and again, this is going to sound a little churchy. I try to be in tune with the Holy Spirit and have a gift and have the gift of discernment and allow the Holy Spirit to direct me in what I need to do.
Hmm.
And then sometimes you do wonder, because I remember on the news sometime back, they did an episode, and we're probably getting away from self-growth, but they did an episode where there were, the women that are sitting at the grocery store with their kids asking for money, or they're on the BART train, and they followed them, and they were getting into like Mercedes Benz, and they were going to like these big houses, and so that created a bit of mistrust, and
Hmm.
so there is a degree of mistrust when it
Hmm.
comes to, doing things like that. But again, I try to be in tune with the spirit and discernment, and let it be my guide.
Okay. All right. Yeah. I relate. I relate to what you're saying. I want to revisit the Muhammad Ali quote with you.
Mhm.
I don't remember it word for word, but would you mind restating it?
Yeah, yeah. Do you mind if I look it up real quick?
Yes, you could look it up.
And this is dead time. Our pastor always says that you never want dead time. You never want dead time when you're doing a live cast. It says the man who views the world at 50 the same way as he did at 20 has wasted 30 years of his life.
Mm,
The man who views the world at 50 the same way as he did at 20 has wasted 30 years of his life.
how would you interpret that?
To me, that's no growth. I mean, if you have the same, if you're if you have the, I should not, I'm 65. I should
Hmm.
not have the same mindset that I had when I was 25,
Hmm.
because I've had 40 years of lived experience. I
Hmm.
should have learned something from those 40 years of lived experience that has enhanced my thought process, my growth, my way of thinking, my way of being. Something should have happened during those 40 years that has moved me forward in my progress.
Okay. Yeah, I would agree with that. And have you fallen into the temptation of having that 20-year-old mindset when you could be like living, I guess, a mature life?
Um, I think the temptation of some ways of thinking is always there. Because if I look back to when I was 20, 25, you know, 30, 35, um, I was I didn't I don't want to say that I was spontaneous, but I didn't always think before I acted.
Hmm.
But now I give more thought to my actions before I actually do them. But the temptation is always there to jump right in, because
Hmm.
I had a flippant mouth at one time, very
Hmm.
flippant mouth.
Hmm.
And it has taken me years of living to learn how to try and control my tongue,
Okay.
and to be quiet, to be silent, because sometimes the best thing you can do in a situation is to say nothing.
Okay. And I would imagine the reason why you said what you said in terms of it's better to be quiet is because maybe you experienced an outcome of you speaking where you maybe should have not. And so is the outcome the inspiration for your refinement in terms of you speaking out of speaking out of what's the word?
Well, sometimes we speak out of anger.
Yeah.
Sometimes we speak out of confusion.
Hmm.
Sometimes we speak out of frustration.
Hmm.
And sometimes it's not always what we say, but how we say it.
Hmm.
And sometimes when a conversation gets to a certain point, rather than continuing down a road where there's no progress and there's no agreement, rather than continuing to be in tension,
Hmm.
it's better just to say, okay, and just be quiet.
Yeah.
And you have to be able to discern that, when it's time to just kind of say okay and stop talking, and when it's time, because sometimes it you may get to a point where you're trying to make a point,
Hmm.
but if it's not going anywhere, why continue down that road? Sometimes it's best just to be silent.
Yes. Yes, I agree. Because it seems like when it comes to expressionism, verbal expressionism in general, um, it's the individual may have a different agenda than yourself when you're having a conversation with them. Some people, it seems, um, make statements because they want to be the victim of the circumstance versus the person who's speaking with them is trying to encourage them and inspire them to have an awareness of how they can transcend the circumstances that they're in. And so if a person is choosing to not have an awareness so that they can grow, then it seems counterproductive for the person that the person that's they're having a conversation with who's trying to help them to continue the conversation. It would
Right,
seem.
right, because some people are stuck.
Hmm.
Some people are stuck, and one of the things that I have learned in my 65 years is that I can't change anyone.
Hmm.
I can't force anyone to grow. They have to want that for themselves.
Hmm.
And so if that person is in a place where they're stuck, what are we supposed to do? We can still support them, but I don't have to have the same conversation over and over and over again.
Hmm.
Sometimes it's better to collect your losses and walk away.
Hmm.
And that's
Yeah.
something we don't like to do. We don't like to walk away. Um, we and we want to be fixers.
Hmm.
We want to fix the problem. We want to fix the person. We want to fix the situation. But sometimes we don't. Sometimes we can't, and sometimes we don't have the skills to do that.
Hmm. Yeah. It's interesting because I like to watch movies sometimes, and I used to read comic books, and the sometimes the story of the plot it seems to intentionally suggest that an individual can save other people from their problems. And as I'm hearing you talk about how you can't control how a person chooses to live their life, the idea of the Superman story uh doesn't seem realistic in terms of uh being there for someone and trying to save them.
Yeah, and they call that a messiah complex or a savior complex,
Hmm.
because we want to save people, but um, we can't save everyone.
Hmm.
And when we try to do that, then we're putting ourselves in a position of being divine and not human.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree with you. And I think to exercise self-discipline and not overextend ourselves for someone who is not trying to better themselves um, is the appropriate route from my perspective so that we don't end up causing harm to ourselves.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's interesting that you say that because in one of my classes this semester we're reading this book on grief, and one of the things that they mention in this book is that we as ministers, and ministers aren't just people that preach the gospel, because we're all called to be ministers. When we're ministering to other people, when we're serving other people, one of the things that it mentioned is that we have to be careful when we are ministering or serving someone that is grieving, because then we can take on that burden, and then
Mm,
that burden becomes our burden, and our job is not to take on the burden, but to help them work through the burden of grieving.
mm, that's interesting. I recently had a conversation with a friend, and I think I had like an epiphany, or an enhanced awareness in terms of self-growth, because I do care for people. I do hope that people um, live a successful, healthy life, and through um, being respectful and kind to people, um, I hope that I see those types of outcomes. But I'm also realizing that, like you said, I can't control anyone. But what I can do is I came to the realization that I can focus on growing myself, and by me focusing on doing that can hopefully inspire someone else to uh focus on growing themselves as an individual.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it seems like that would be a healthy alternative than to me trying to save that person from the problems that, from an accountability context, they need to overcome as an individual. And I think throughout my early childhood and my life, be it just uh cultural behaviors, it seemed like there was a subtle uh alluding to of me being a savior to other people. I can't say that no one has never told me that I need to save other people, but I just felt like there were subtleties amongst the people that I was around that seemed to suggest that I am supposed to be dependable for them. But when it comes for me, I think it's important to be an individual. And as individuals, we could be supportive of each other through our um, individuality and growing ourselves as individuals, and seeing each other uh, do that can help us to just improve as a whole or a collective.
Yeah.
Would you relate to that?
Well, it's interesting when you were talking about supporting someone through your own journey of growth.
Mm,
Because just recently, I was looking at some research about, and I told you my faith was important to me. So just recently, I was looking at some research about evangelism,
mm,
and there was a research study that was done of I think it was Gen Z. It's the is it 11 to 26 year olds,
mm,
and they felt that their actions spoke louder than their words
mm,
when it comes to sharing their faith. So even with self-growth, our actions speak louder than anything that we can say. So if they see you growing, then hopefully they will then want to grow also. So by seeing you progressing, whether that growth is in behavior or attitude or thinking or learning something new or whatever it is, if they see you moving forward, then that will cause them hopefully to want to move forward also.
I appreciate you sharing that information, because there's been times in when I pondered or considered being a mentor to someone. And so to hear that type of commentary from younger generations is I guess motivational for me, so that I can, should I choose to be a mentor to someone, I'll have that type of enhanced perspective. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, because one of the things that I've learned about young people is that they can pick up phony real easy. And I think that's why actions speak louder than words for them, because they want to be able to see you growing. They want to be able to see how something that bothered you 2 years ago don't bother you anymore. They want to be able to see that, because when they see that, then they know that there's true growth that has happened.
Okay. I want to ask you about your professional career, and how did you discover that being a nurse was your calling?
So I was a respiratory therapist. And
A respiratory therapist, I'm
kind of
sorry.
long story short, so this was my second career actually. My first career was in banking. I was working for the bank, started out as a teller, worked my way up through the ranks, and I was to a manager. And I had an illness, and that illness caused me to reevaluate my life and the amount of time I was putting into the job. And so I voluntarily took it was a demotion, because I went from a very large branch to a much smaller branch. And at that time, the banking industry was going through some things, and they were consolidating branches where one manager was managing two offices. And so the decision was made that the manager of a bigger office in my area would manage my office and his office. So I got laid off. And so when I got laid off, I had to make a decision. What am I going to do now? Because at that time, I think Kim was in elementary school, and I was divorced, and I had to make a living. And so I kind of was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And I decided that there was two things that we were always going to need. We were always going to need law enforcement, and we were always going to need healthcare. And I wasn't carrying a gun, and I wasn't trying to protect nobody. So I knew that was not for me. And so started exploring some fields, in the healthcare field. And my mom wanted me to be a nurse because my younger sister Sheila was a nurse. But nursing just never excited me. It was never anything that I wanted to do. And my dentist suggested, why don't you become a dental hygienist, and then you could make your own hours? But the thought of looking in somebody's mouth just turned my stomach, because I have a thing about teeth. And just the thought of working an 8-hour day and just looking, that just turned me off. And my younger sister Sheila told me about respiratory care. And so I started researching the field and researching, what it would take in order to be able to get into that area. And kind of long story short, I enrolled in the program at Skyline College in Pacifica and got hired at San Francisco General Hospital. And so I worked there and I worked for Kaiser for a number of years. And then I left Kaiser and worked just strictly at San Francisco General. And I worked at San Francisco General for 25 years. And that was the greatest experience in the world. San Francisco General is the only trauma center in the city and county of San Francisco. So we basically saw everything, and the respiratory therapists there had a lot of autonomy and they were held in very high regards. And we only worked in the intensive care unit. So we didn't do a lot of floor care like the therapists at other hospitals did. So our standard was much higher, and our level of the level of our profession was much higher. And so I did that for I did bedside for about 13 years, and then I moved into the clinic. And when I moved into the clinic, I supervised the therapists that worked in our sleep clinic, our chest clinic, our allergy clinic, and our COPD clinic. So I did that for the latter part of the years that I worked there.
Wow. And so I appreciate you giving me more backstory in terms of your professional career, in terms of how you transitioned from one industry to the next. What I want to ask is, so it would seem like due to you choosing to leave the banking job to become a respiratory therapist, was somewhat of, it would seem like you probably had a point of uncertainty of if you may or may not enjoy this new career. Was there a moment when you sensed like intuitively like a sensation of excitement that helped you or inspired you to take the leap of faith and try something new and different?
Well, a lot of times when people look at my two careers, they think that they're total opposite, but
Mm,
there were a lot of transferable skills from the banking industry that I used in my second career as a respiratory therapist,
mm,
because it is a service industry. I
mm,
mean, in banking, the service was to the banking customers, but when I was a respiratory therapist, my customers were my patients, my customers were the nurses, my customers were the doctors. So I was providing a service, so there were a lot of transferable skills. As far as excitement is concerned, I was excited about it from day one.
mm,
Even going through the program, it was just learning how the body works. And it when I was taking my prerequisites, one of the prerequisites that I had to take was physiology. And this particular professor, all I heard was, "Oh, he's so tough. Oh, you're gonna hate that class." And you know what? That was like the best class. I love that class because it is amazing to me how our bodies work and how our bodies compensate, how one organ compensates for another if that one is failing. And it's just exciting to me. And even working in the intensive care unit, we worked with very, very sick people that were on life support. And I mean, in addition to, I worked the ventilator, so they had a tube down their throat and they were connected to the what in layman terms they call the breathing machine. And that's what I ran, was that machine that controlled their breathing. And there was
mm,
a lot that went into that, but it
mm,
worked in tandem with the nurse and everything that she was doing. But just the excitement when you were able to take that tube out and they were able to take a deep breath
mm,
and they were able to speak those first words
mm,
was just amazing.
mm,
Um, on the opposite side of the coin, um, the times that I would have to withdraw support
Mm-hmm.
were some of the saddest moments in my career. And I
Mm-hmm.
struggled with it at first.
Mm-hmm.
And because I it was like, I'm taking that tube out and they're gonna die. And and I think you had Merv on your show, and I
Mm-hmm.
actually had to go to Merv to get some spiritual counseling on that. And
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that he told me was that one of the taking the tube out and allowing them to die with dignity and peacefully was one of the most compassionate things that anyone could do. And
Mm-hmm.
that kind of allowed me to be able to look at it differently as far as withdrawing support is concerned. So I think that answered your question. I hope so.
It did. It was very insightful and valuable information. What my next question is it's possible to be employed for solely monetary gain. But from my perspective, the hope, at least for me, is regardless if I'm working or if I'm at home, I want to grow in any experience. What did you while you were a respiratory therapist, were you able to grow in those experiences? And if so, how?
Absolutely, absolutely. So in addition to having we had to do continuing education unit CEUs. So
Mm,
you were required to do so many every year because you were required to keep your skills up. And that's true of nurses and doctors. We all, because you can't just get your license and then that's the end. You don't need to go to school anymore. So you're continually learning. Again, I was at San Francisco General, and so we did a lot of research. So in the research, again, we were uh, trying to find better ways of taking care of patients. So that required a lot of learning and growth as well. When I graduated from Skyline, I graduated with an associate's degree in respiratory care. And then uh, when I went into the clinic, that was after I think I'd done respiratory. That was about 13, 14 years in. I went back to school to get my bachelor's degree,
mm,
not because it was going to give me any more money, but because, um, and this is where when we talked about actions,
mm,
I had coworkers that had gone back to school and gotten their bachelor's degree.
mm,
So I was not going to be outdone. And because I saw they had gone back and gotten their bachelor's degrees, then I went back and got my bachelor's degree as well.
mm,
As well as I acquired certain certifications because I was doing tobacco cessation counseling in the clinic. So I had to go to the Mayo Clinic and go through that whole program in order to become certified. Then I
mm,
was doing asthma education. And in order for me to be an asthma educator, you had to take a certain number of classes. You had to pass an exam in order to be able to use that designation as a certified asthma educator. So there's constant learning and growth in the
mm,
field.
mm.
And it's true for anyone in the medical field. They always have, you're always keeping your skills up, learning new ways, and improving the way that we do the art of medicine.
Wow. And so now that you elaborated more on how you grew while being a respiratory therapist, what what I realize when I think about the hospitals, it seems like the intent of a hospital existing is to assist in healing the individual so that then they can uh, return to living a healthy life if possible.
Mm-hmm.
And so you said that there were times when you experienced individuals who transitioned on and were no longer living. but when you experience that, it was challenging to endure because you're seeing them like they're losing their life or they're
Taking their
dying.
last breath,
Yeah.
basically. Mhm.
And I think just naturally, no one really wants, you know, to experience that in repetition. So I can imagine by enhancing your education and also your intellect in terms of respiratory therapy, in theory, that having that type of enhanced knowledge could potentially help to heal or not save. It could help to heal or yeah, heal the individual so that they can potentially live a longer life and you don't have to experience seeing them die too. So I see the value in that is in terms of like a reason to want to get educated. Um, if you're going to be providing a service to people who are in the hospital, which can also benefit you because now if you're able to help to elongate their life, you won't have to endure the circumstances of seeing them die. So,
Yeah, and that was one of the things that I loved about when I was working in the clinic.
mhm,
Because when I worked in the clinic, most of my work was education,
mhm,
helping them to understand their disease process, whether it was obstructive sleep apnea, whether it was asthma, whether it was COPD, whether it was how to use their inhalers correctly, whether it was how to clear their secretions, their sputum, their mucus, so that they could breathe easier. So all of those were preventative measures of teaching the patient so that they could live a better, fuller life.
mhm,
And so that was one of the things that I truly enjoyed about working in the clinic. And then I thought about when you were talking about a patient transitioning, and I thought you were going to go down that road, because one of the things that we have to be careful of, when I was working, and even when I was acting as a preceptor, training new therapists that were hired on,
mhm,
um, that you have to take time for self-care,
mhm,
because um, it can be emotionally and spiritually draining
mhm,
to to withdraw support, because you hear the family crying, you can hear the weeping and the wailing, and that automatically, even for me, it would bring back to my remembrance my own personal experiences of loss.
mhm,
So I would tell the young people, because they were much younger than me, the new therapists that were coming on, and they would come out and they would be in tears, and I would tell them, you have to have an outlet. And I would tell them, my faith is my outlet, but
mhm,
you have to have whatever outlet you need in order to be able to do this work. Because if
mhm,
you don't, you're going to burn out. So that too is even a process of self-growth, becoming aware of what you're feeling and the feelings that are being brought back up through this
mhm.
experience, and how am I going to deal with this so that I don't carry that heaviness home with me to my family.
Wow, that's very valuable. That was great. I'm glad you mentioned that as well. And I think also I've never, witnessed someone take their final breaths, but I think the I think should I, you know, be a respiratory therapist? I can imagine helping these people hopefully recover from whatever their condition is. And if they do, transition on, I think, my efforts weren't wasted. I think there's still like a lesson to be learned. And I think the lesson to be learned, it would seem, is uh the sense of being humble and knowing that I am able to continue living my life in the present moment and 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 to be disciplined enough to put forth an effort to um live a healthy life to the best of my capabilities where I could, go a route of detriment and diminishment of my health, be it partying or drinking and stuff like that. So I think I would, if I were to experience something like that, I would be humbled, and I would also um, have a sense of gratitude for the present moment so that, I can continue to live a fulfilling life.
Yeah,
Did you get that
I
sensation?
would I would definitely agree with that because if it taught me nothing else, it taught me the brevity of life.
Mm,
There's a scripture in the Bible, well, two scriptures I'm going to mention. One says, Lord, teach me to number my days. And
mhm,
the other says, your life is like a vapor. It's here and then it's gone.
mhm,
And so in order for us to have an abundant life, part of having an abundant life is taking care, being good stewards over this body that we have,
mhm,
and doing what we need to do in order to maintain a certain degree of health.
mhm,
There's some things that are hereditary and genetic that we have no control over, but we have control over certain things as far as our body is concerned. And so in response to your question, yes, every time um, we lost a patient, whether it was a young person or an older person, it just reminded me of the brevity of life and how humble um, I need to be in order to appreciate this life. Um, when I was working in the intensive care unit, because we're turning beds over constantly, um, someone would pass away in room 3, and no sooner do they clean the body, get it in the body bag, take it down to the morgue, there's a new patient in room 3 that we're treating. So it's
mhm.
like that life is gone, and then there's another patient there. So you can't spend time thinking about the one that's gone because you got another patient to take care of. And
Wow.
so that too was very humbling, because a lot of times we think that we are so important and so significant that certain things will not continue if we're not there.
Mm.
But life will go on. Life will continue. I was asked to speak. This was right after the George Floyd murder. They did a roundtable, and they asked me to speak about my experiences as a Black woman working in my department. And one of the people asked a question about not wanting to uh, um, accept a promotion and leave her department because she didn't want to create ill feelings. And one of the things that I told her was, if you die tomorrow, they're going to have somebody else in that position.
Mm.
So none of us are so indispensable that whatever it is that we're doing, somebody else, they're not going to move somebody else into that position. So it behooves us to be humble and know that this is where it is right now at the present,
Mhm.
and this is what is happening right now. But um if I leave tomorrow, it's going to continue, it's going to
Wow.
go on. So
Yeah.
so that arrogance of thinking that everything's going to stop if I'm not here, that goes out the window.
I agree with you, and I appreciate you sharing that additional testimony. I found value in that one. Um, the time is 8:30. I think I'm going to transition to our section of the podcast known as the multiple intelligence theory. And so I'm going to share my screen. Okay. So for those new to the Journey of Self-Growth podcast, I present this section because some people may not be aware of this theory, but there are two popular theories that have been facilitated, and one is more popular than the other in terms of intellect, which suggests that we as individuals have three forms of intellect, which would be mathematical, scientific or naturalistic, and linguistic, such as writing, reading, and writing. And as a result of this theory being highly popularized, um, when we are graduating from high school, hoping to be accepted into college, we are presented with the SAT exam, and depending on how well we perform on this test, could determine our eligibility at particular colleges due to the the thought that if you are intelligent in writing, math, and science, you're overall like intelligent. However, there's an alternative theory presented by a theorist named Howard Gardner, which suggests, in addition to the three mentioned intellects, there's six additional that an individual possesses. My intention for presenting this multiple intelligence theory is there may be people out there who have low self-esteem due to the fact that they may not be uh, highly intellectual in writing math and science, but they may be highly intellectual in the six unknown intellects that are presented here in this chart. And if you are, that I feel like that could be inspirational for you to um, just to put forth an effort to go along with your journey and improve yourself and be open to the possibility that you can learn something new about yourself and life. So I want to ask Eula, of the nine int of the nine intelligence presented on this chart, which one or more do you sense you have high degrees of intellect in, and how were you able to achieve these high degrees?
Well, this is interesting because when you sent me this, again, I think I mentioned to you that one of my professors says that I'm a researcher. So I immediately started looking up information about this.
Hmm.
And so the thing that, before I answer your question, I thought about this idea of intelligence. And
Hmm.
one of the things that I noted, it said IQ scores can determine intellectual potential or someone's expected capabilities. It
Hmm.
doesn't necessarily mean that they're smart. So when
Hmm.
we think about intelligence, we always think about someone being smart, um, based upon our understanding of intelligence.
Hmm.
And so when I saw this, I thought it was interesting. I thought it was interesting that we look at intelligence from a different perspective.
Hmm.
So that was interesting to me. And the one that stood out to me, which I think is what I'm trying to work on the most, is this intrapersonal intelligence.
Hmm.
Understanding yourself, what you feel, and what you want.
Hmm.
And when I looked it up, it says it's a self-cognizance.
Hmm.
Um, and I don't know if that is because of where I am in life right now.
Hmm.
Um, but I think it's real important for me as a person for me to understand me, what I like, what I don't like, what I'll put up with, what I won't put up with. My niece Dion, your cousin Dion, Travis's wife, she mentioned to me that her group was reading, is her name Shalonda Rhimes, her
Mm-hmm.
book, The Year of Yes.
Mm,
And today I was listening to the chapter that said yes to no. And she
mm,
said no is the most powerful word in the vocabulary, because no is what you will or will not accept. And a lot of times I think that when it comes to interpersonal and understanding yourself and what you feel and what you will accept, a lot of times we say yes to things that we really should have said no, but because we don't want to hurt feelings, because we don't want to appear weak, because of all these other things, we do it, but we really don't want to.
mm-hmm.
And what does that do to us as a person?
Mm-hmm.
So that one stood out to me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then because I like being outside, I like living things, I like nature, I like water. The naturalistic stood out to me.
Mm-hmm.
And something that I read said that naturalistic, a possible career was like a farmer. And I like to plant. I used to plant gardens and things of that nature, and that brought me a lot of joy and a lot of happiness. um I think those are the two that stand out to me the most. One of the things that I think that I need to work on is the linguistic,
Mm-hmm.
finding the right words to express what you mean, because I can't always find the right word.
Mm-hmm.
Did I answer your question?
Yes, you did. I think you answered the first part. You said interpersonal and naturalistic intellects are those where you sense you have high degrees in.
Yes.
And the second part of the question is for those curious to know how to enhance their interpersonal and naturalistic intelligences based on your experience, what would you recommend they do?
Well, from an intrapersonal standpoint, I think you really have to do a self-reflection and a
Mm-hmm.
self-evaluation
Mm-hmm.
and be honest with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and sometimes being honest is with yourself is harder than being is harder than being honest with other people,
Mm-hmm.
because that means you have to look in the mirror and
Mm-hmm.
you have to admit your faults
Mm-hmm.
and where you fall down and where um you need to do better.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I think that's difficult for a lot of us.
Mm-hmm.
um the example that I gave you about when I was in my 20s, I had a flippant mouth. I would say stuff, but through understanding myself, saying, you know what, you probably shouldn't have said that.
Mm-hmm.
That takes self-reflection.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if I've grown in that area because since I've been over at the Berkeley School of Theology, I've had to write a lot of self-reflective papers. We have to write a lot of, reflecting back on whatever it was that we were studying, and what does that mean to me, and how do I feel about that, and how can I grow? What's next? What's the next step? Um, yeah. As far as naturalists, I don't know how someone would grow in that area. I think because for me, I'm just drawn to it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think if we could just all get out in nature at some point. You like to walk, I like to walk. When I'm out walking, I'm taking pictures, and that's not being present, unfortunately, but I'm trying to capture the beauty of flowers, or the beauty of the water, or the beauty of of the sun as it's beaming through the clouds. I'm trying to capture all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I notice, even when I do that, when I'm out walking,
Mm-hmm.
I don't take time to sit on the bench and enjoy the moment.
Hmm.
And I think that would enhance uh in that area.
Versus you say you don't enjoy you don't enjoy the moment because you don't take time to just sit and be
Present.
still or
Yeah.
present. Yeah.
Because I'm walking and I'm like, okay, I'm walking, I'm gonna do 3.5 miles and I'm gonna be done by this time. And I'm looking at my watch
Mm,
as opposed to by the water. It's not gonna hurt just to stop and sit and reflect for a moment, pay attention to the cool breeze, pay attention to the warmth of the sun on my skin, pay attention to the sound of the water as the waves come in.
hmm.
I don't take time to enjoy that
Hmm. Oh,
fully because I'm thinking about I got to finish my walk.
okay. Well, from the outside looking in, it what I notice is that you do acknowledge by initiating just simply sitting versus walking, is to me demonstrates that you want to refine yourself, which to me is a step forward versus thinking alternatively it's better for me to not just sit down at all and just continue on with this pattern. So I think that's a positive step in terms of your growth and wanting to appreciate nature more. I
Yes.
think I think also you had said in the past you have done uh gardening.
Mm-hmm.
I think gardening could be a way to enhance your naturalist intellect, because when I think of enhancement of intellect overall, it seems like initiation is key in order to grow it. And I like to reference sports. If I want to become efficient at football, soccer, basketball, I have to pick up the ball or kick the ball in order for me to uh, have a perspective of what it takes to be efficient or better in that particular sport. Another word to use is engagement. I need to engage in the experience versus just sitting on the bench while other people are doing
Right.
it.
Right. There has to be some action involved.
Yes.
Some initiation of action. Yeah. Not just
Hmm.
thinking about it, but being about it.
That's a good example. I was talking to Travis the other day, not and we were talking about swimming. And he was saying there's a difference between thinking about swimming versus actually being in the water and swimming. If
Right.
you're and I know that's easy to like, say, but I mean, to actually be in the water and tread water, it takes a particular type of effort versus just simply thinking about it. And if
Right.
you and if you continue on getting in the water, in theory, you should be able to do it more efficiently, and which ultimately demonstrates growth in that particular experience.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because Sheila used to come over here to my place to swim,
Hmm.
but she would watch the YouTube video
Hmm.
to perfect her technique, and
Hmm.
then she'd come here and then she'd practice it.
Hmm.
So the same thing. It's not thinking about it, not watching it, and but actually doing it. And even in the medical field, we learn theory, but then we would go into the hospital for our clinical rotation. So
Hmm.
we'd be in the classroom to learn the theory, but then we'd go into the hospital during our clinical rotation to actually do it. And
Mm.
that's where the growth comes.
Okay. The next question regarding the multiple intelligence theory is, which one or more of the nine intellects do you sense you have low degrees of intellect, and Yeah, which of the nine do you have low degrees of intellect, and do you want to enhance them? If so, why?
Okay, so I think if I had to say low degree, it would be logical, mathematical,
Hmm.
um, and and I think probably the spatial, the visualizing the world in 3D.
Hmm.
Um, I'm a visual person, but I'm not an abstract person.
Mm.
And so for me to visualize it, I have to actually touch it, feel it in order for me to get it.
Yeah.
Um, and logical, mathematical, because it says quantifying things, making hypotheses and proving them. And I know I don't do that very well. When I was at the hospital, I did do some research projects, but I was always doing the hands-on part of the research. It wasn't creating the hypothesis and trying to craft the research in order to test the hypothesis. And I have no desire to I have no desire to improve in that area because I've never been able to. I just don't have that. I just don't think I have that ability. That's not one of my strong suits. Uh,
Hmm.
yeah, research. If once they designed the research, which I think that falls, this logical mathematical fell in. Once they designed it, whatever the hands-on was in order to prove it, I could do it. But as far as quantifying it and coming up with a hypothesis, no, I've never been good at that.
Yeah, I think math is I think where I have a low degree of intellect, and I think if I'm a type of person who puts forth an effort to being present, sometimes I think the idea of hypothesizing, which is like guessing, um, seems counterintuitive to me. So, I mean, and I'm not saying that's, my theory is right, but um, so that's what I think that's why I'm challenged in the mathematical intellect. But I noticed too, though, when it comes to nature, numbers aren't you can't find numbers in nature. It seems like it's a man-made construct anyway when it comes to the numerical system. But I do notice that in like if I'm outside and there's a tree in front of me, I I can like notice that there's a certain number of apples on the tree, and I feel like by them being that, on the tree, it means something, but it doesn't necessarily, I don't think necessarily numbers are necessary for um like the math aspect in life. Um, if that makes any sense.
Yeah,
But
I think it's probably there, but we don't realize it because one of the things that I think about when you talk about numbers and nature, as I mentioned to you, I like to watch National Geographic, and one of the shows that I watch is called I think it's called Early Alaskans, First Alaskan, something like that. But I remember on one of the episodes, the two brothers were out hunting
mhm,
and two swans flew up and they said we can't shoot one of them
mhm,
because swans pair for life,
mm,
and if you shoot one of them, the other one will just circle and circle and circle looking for the other pair.
mm,
So there you do have numbers because you have a pair of two.
yes.
So I think sometimes it's there, but we just don't realize you know we may not realize it, because even if you think of the flow of water in a stream,
Mm-hmm.
as the stream becomes more narrow,
Mm-hmm.
the flow will become a little faster through that narrow path.
Mm-hmm.
And so that too is numbers, because you're looking at how fast the flow is going.
Mm-hmm.
So I think numbers are there, but we just don't think about them.
Yeah. Okay. I think I'm kind of surprised that you didn't mention the existential intelligence as one that you have a high degree of intellect in, where I think it talks about the whys, why we live, why we die. Um, Given the fact that you experienced those types of circumstances as a respiratory therapist, though, you know, I recognize that, it's possible that you don't have a high degree, but I was somewhat surprised.
Yeah, and I think when I look at that, the first thing that comes to my mind is my faith,
Hmm.
because my faith tells me why we live and why we die.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that would probably be somewhere up there in the higher ones.
Hmm.
But those other two, just kind of like, those were the ones that just kind of really stood out to me.
Okay, great. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. We're going to conclude this section of the podcast and move on to the final section, which is called interpreting expression. And give a brief description of this, there in life, people express themselves verbally via a statement or a question, and it's possible that these expressions can be relatable to those who read them or hear them, which can then uh, be motivation for the individual to continue their journey of self-growth. And today we have a quote. It's a new quote. I put it in the group chat for those who are watching. And if you have any questions or you would like to share your interpretation of this quote, I encourage you to do so. But the quote is, "The devil wants you to worry about what's next, so you can't enjoy what's now. Always focus on God so he can come through in the present." Eula, how would you interpret that quote?
So I have to interpret that from a faith standpoint. And I realize that, you may have viewers that are not that are not that are not Christian. Um, but there's a scripture in the Bible that says, and I'm paraphrasing, why do you worry about what you're going to wear, what you're going to eat? God provides for the air, the birds of the air, the lilies of the valley. So seek ye first the kingdom of God and all his righteousness, and everything else will be added unto it. And so when we think about worrying about the past, um, if you're constantly looking in the past, you can't move forward. If you're constantly looking in the past, you can't even live in the present. And so um, um, I've heard several times the analogy of when you are driving, and the mirror that looks in the back is smaller than your windshield. And it's because you need to pay attention to where you're going.
Mm.
So if we are constantly looking back, then that hinders us from moving forward. And it says, the quote said, that the devil wants you to worry about your past and not move forward, but God wants you to repeat it again. God wants you to the present.
It says the devil wants you to The devil wants you to worry about what's next so you can't enjoy what's now. Always focus on God so he can come through in the present.
Worry about what's next, what's coming next. And so I think when we were talking earlier, I talked about the fact that I think that technology has caused us all to have attention deficit disorder because we are unable to stay in the present. And there's so many distractions that are vying for our attention. I remember reading an article where this restaurant was trying to figure out why people were why the tables weren't being turned over um, faster. And when they kind of started evaluating it, they learned that it was because people were taking pictures of their food and posting their food on Facebook and Instagram. And so they were spending more time at the table taking pictures than enjoying the meal.
Mhm.
And so when we start to worry about what's going to happen next, when is when is the other shoe going to drop? We can't enjoy the present.
Mhm.
And as we were talking before the podcast started, it takes work to be in the present. It
Mhm.
takes work to to not uh, worry about what happened yesterday or what's going to happen tomorrow.
Mhm.
Um, because we have no control. We have no control over what happened yesterday. What's done is done.
Mhm.
We have no control over what's going to happen tomorrow because tomorrow hasn't come. The Bible says tomorrow has enough worries of its own.
Mhm.
So all we have is right now.
Mhm.
So I think, it uses the words, the devil and God, but it's very, very true. Even if one is not a Christian, we cannot worry about what's going to come next because we have no control over what's going to come next. All we have is right now. So we should all try to be present for the right now so that we can continue on this journey.
Yes, I agree with you. And I also think like you said, the words the devil and God can be translated um and relatable based on the individual. And I think to reference an experience that I had, there was a time when I got hired for a job and they told me that I was they're going to hire me to work full time. And then maybe like 3 weeks into the job, I got my hours reduced unexpectedly. And at that time, I had bills to pay. So when I saw the schedule change in the present, I was tempted to think about what's next in terms of how I'm going to pay my bills if I don't get my full-time hours soon versus okay, this is what is happening and let me continue on doing my job in the present moment and not worry about it. And so I decided to not think about what was going to happen next because it was obvious that the circumstance had changed and it seems like it happened for a reason. So there's nothing I can do about it other than continuing on with my day and working. And I th- I think that in fairness to people who uh who fall into the temptation of focusing on what has happened or what ki could happen, it's challenging to not be present if you haven't been trained or provided guidance on how to be present. So if you have fell into the temptation of focusing on what could happen next, or what has happened next, I would say, um, based on my personal experience, it seems like we attract experiences. We attract things, whether we want to or not. And when we attract these experiences, we still have to like live in the experience. And when I say what I mean by live is grow. And so hopefully the experience that we attract will be to our benefit so that we can continue on with our life in a successful manner. And I reference the fact that after several weeks of having my hours cut and not worrying about it, the outcome was my hours were brought back up to full time. And so I was very thankful and grateful for that change of circumstance. But I think had I started worrying about it through that 2 week or 3 week duration of not having those hours, I could have caused harm to myself, internally stressing. Um, and it seems like those 3 weeks of not having those hours was a lesson for me to learn. And so I can then share this with you today.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
mhm,
Because that worrying is not going to add one additional second to your life.
mhm,
In fact, is actually going to take away because of that stress.
mhm,
So worrying about it, worrying about the shoe dropping, when is the other shoe going to drop? That's not going to do anything to your benefit. It's going to
mhm,
be more detrimental than it is going to be beneficial.
mhm. And in terms of the word, in terms of the section where it says always focus on God so he can come through in the present, if 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 we're supposed to be present so that we can like live like a successful life, it would seem to me in theory that God is also a part of the present, or God is the present moment. And if
Right.
and if we are distracting ourselves, we may not be able to um, be aware of uh, an opportunity to do better in the present, which could be God or the universe presenting us with an opportunity as a result of us not worrying. So um,
Yeah.
that's the way I interpret that section.
Yeah. And I just want to leave you with this one scripture, Proverbs 3, verses 5 and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and with all your soul, and lean not to your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your path. So we have to trust him in the present to provide for us in the future, so we can be present right now. So we don't
Mm,
have to worry about tomorrow. We trust him right now.
mm. I appreciate that. Okay, I think we have concluded that section, and we've reached the end of the Journey of Self-Growth podcast, episode 15. Eula, what would your final words be?
Continue to grow. I consider myself a lifelong learner. Continue to have an open mind, continue to be teachable, and continue to grow. And remember, it's progress and not perfection.
I can relate to that. And I would, my final words are, excuse me, something in my throat. My final words would be intentions matter. And I think if we're aware of what we intend, then our actions can be that more impactful in our lives. So because when we act and are aware of our intentions, we can relate to what the outcomes are versus just going through life and doing things blindly without uh care. So I think intentions matter, and I would encourage others to uh enhance their awareness of intent. I hope everyone will enjoy the rest of the evening. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, it's an open invitation, and I hope you would consider doing that. I left my email in the group chat. It's my first. It's not my first name, but it's in the group chat. You can also reach me on Instagram at kete.music. That's KETE dot music, and leave me a message and I'll reach out to you. I hope everyone will enjoy the rest of the evening. I appreciate you. Good night. Okay, you